this is now what I use to pay for everything. I just walk up and tap with my phone, or I'll just tap with my watch. I don't really carry change on me anymore. I was all about carrying a big fat stack in your wallet. I had the Costanza wallet at the time. But.
So when you say you got you had the Costanza watch, baby, look at this. Look at that. Huh?
There you go.
All day. The new question that fooled Google's AI and has forced them to scrap out of their research is, can you melt an egg? You're not allowed to have a beer in Dude Chilling Park during the World Cup. That seems a little over the top. Well, the seawall's right here. The seawall's the best patio on planet Earth, right? The entire seawall you should be allowed to have a beer on the seawall.
All right, welcome to XY Year Z, a cross-generational podcast talk show where we basically tell whose generation is best. And I'd like to introduce myself. I'm one of your hosts, Nathan Kliem. I'm representing Generation X. Next to me, we have Kian Gilroy.
I am representing Generation Z.
And our guest today joining us is Darryl Lamb.
I guess I'm what you call a zillennial.
A zillennial?
That's right.
Nice. So you are brand manager, wine, food, gastronomic wizard, and co-host on one of Canada's longest running, what do you say, dedicated beer program, just here for the beer. And you have a segment on there?
Yeah, so our show's called RTD, Ready to Drink, Cider, Sodas, and Cocktails, and we just entered our 9th year of our radio show and podcast.
That is amazing. All right, Kian.
On this episode, we will talk about technology in the generations and Tipsy Tales.
So the first one, we're like, what has technology done to us? Are we dumber for it, or are we better for it? So, Darryl, what do you think is the biggest tech change you're struggling with nowadays compared to back in the past?
Wow, do we have 5 hours?
Oh, absolutely. We got as much time as you want to talk about.
You know, I think one of the biggest changes right off the bat is the self-inflicted isolation that we've seen now compared to when we were coming up. You know, like we were, out. You had to go out, you had to play together as kids, then you were kind of getting into trouble as teenagers, then you were going to the bars. Like to meet people, you had to go out. You had to go to a workplace to meet people.
You were forced to socialize. You were forced to interact.
You don't need to. You don't need to leave your own house ever at all, right? You can work remotely. You can get deliveries every day of everything that you want. And so I feel like we're losing that interconnectivity, and it's maybe exposing us to some badder parts of our nature.
Kian, would you agree with that? Do you find yourself cocooning?
I do agree. I don't leave the house. But another thing I was kind of thinking of is as technology gets better, it gets easier to just do nothing. We're smarter in what we do because we couldn't have operated a device before, but now we're dumber.
I don't even know where growing up, before we had cell phones, I used to remember 40, 50 phone numbers off by heart because that's what you had to do. Now, if I don't leave the house with my phone, this is my memory. I feel so dumb without my phone.
What's even crazier is I'm a homeowner, and I tell you right now, I can't even remember my postal code, but I can tell you my parents' postal code back in Ontario from heart. I can tell you their phone number. I can tell them their postal. I've owned this place for 3 years, and I have to look up the postal code when I need to put it in to something new that I'm signing up. It just doesn't compute. Who uses the post office anymore? Why do you need to know postal codes?
Now that you say that, I still remember my phone number from back in 1988. Why? Why do I need to know that useless piece of information?
Well, I remember when they had to bring in the area code. So suddenly, now you're 416. What does that mean? I thought we were already 775. Now you're 416. Oh, that's further and further. And then one major change you see now is because there's so many throwaway phones, so many burner phones. Phones are just so easy. How fast they have to come out with area codes now. It was 416 for 30 years, and now Toronto has 30 area codes. It was 604 in Vancouver forever, and we use phone numbers in our till at Legacy for points, and I'm seeing whoa, where's that area code? Oh, that's the new cell phone area code. kind of thing. So, like area codes, there's so many of them now, right? I mean, the Ludacris song would now take 45 minutes if he needed to do it today.
Oh man, I remember the one reason why BC needed a new area code is because we had so many fax machines. Who has used a fax machine nowadays?
I kid you not, the BC government, the BC LDP still uses fax machines. So we have to like fax stuff to them occasionally, and so we have to scan it and then use this app that will then create a facsimile so that it will work with their fax machine at the BC government.
Yeah, it's like one step forward, two steps back.
Oh, why? Why change? Perfection was achieved in 1987.
Yeah, there we go.
I have a bit of a random question here. Did you guys like memorize your credit card information back then as well? Because I heard about some people used to do that.
We didn't have to be honest, people get credit cards so much earlier now. Like I don't think I got a credit card till I was in my 20s. Like everything was cash heavy. Debit was a relatively new kind of thing, so you would always just you go to the cash machine, you used to dole out 5s, not 20s, and you would do everything in cash. Like, I didn't get a credit card, I kid you not, till I was 26, 27 years old, because you suddenly needed one to rent a car. And,
all the interesting things.
Yeah, so something was like, all right, so by like 1997, 1998, had to get a credit card. But now, when you see 15, 16-year-olds with credit cards, it's a totally different thing because you need credit cards to activate anything.
15 and 16, are those like the prepaid or the debit credit cards?
Yeah, I mean, so you throw money on. So like if your kid wants to get something new off of Steam doesn't take cash, so you gotta fill up a credit card to their account, right?
Yeah. That's on your Christmas wish list there, isn't it, Kian?
Steam gift card, yes.
Steam gift cards.
Gift cards. Yeah, it's kind of crazy, too, because this is now what I use to pay for everything. I just walk up and tap with my phone, or I'll just tap with my watch. I don't really carry change on me anymore. I never thought I would ever say that. Like before, I was all about carrying a big fat stack in your wallet. I had the Costanza wallet at the time. Like with all the cards that you had, with all the bills that you would put in there. And then you would... The one good thing about that was that you knew how much money you had. And it was harder to part with said cash. And now... next thing you know, you're like, why am I broke again? Like, it's so easy to spend money.
I kid you not, my wife and I still only function in cash. We do that on purpose. So we budget everything in cash. So you have this earmarked for this. So we will not impulse buy. Like, I'm Scottish, man. Like, we're frugal as all get up. So cash is the way to go. And as a small business owner, I can understand why we appreciate cash, because if you pay with credit card, 5% of that does not go to the small business that you're supporting. 5% of that goes to the multinational corporation that allowed that transaction. So cash all day for me, it's just something that I've never really given up, and I won't give up. So when you say you had the Costanza watch, baby, look at this, look at that, huh?
There you go.
All day. And, as an old Toronto boy, front pocket only, because someone's going to take it from your back pocket.
Okay, I was going to say, you don't have any back issues.
Well, I finally took the rubber band off of it a couple of years ago. So you wrap your wallet in a rubber band because it couldn't slide out of your pocket as easy, and you could feel like I tried to pick
the wife got me one of the Ridge wallets, slim, because I had just that. She's like, no, we're changing this now.
So a little cash on there, though. That's a good thing.
Yeah, little bit of cash. Emergency. I don't know how many times I've needed to have cash on hand because some freaking kid needs, hey, I need this for school, or can you help me out with this, or I need bus ride fare. It's like, okay, fine. I'll give it to you.
And it just goes along, and you know exactly what you have. You're not suddenly able to, I do want this. And
here's something that I love to do that's fun. When you get something from, say, a corner gas station, you're buying some chips, pop, or you're going to the movie centers, or you're, say, going to McDonald's where you have a lot of the younger generations working the tills, and your order comes to $13.75, and you give them $15. And ask them to give you, or like watching them count change. How many people know how to count change back? It's horrendous. Like, or you give them like just enough to round it up to the next dollar, so you don't get all your change back, but it's bills, and they can't calculate it.
Oh, it's every time when it's like you put the extra toonie down, so they can just give you a loonie back, and like, oh, that's too much money. Here, no, I'm making it easier on you. But it's absolutely true. At Legacy Liquor Store, we're actually buying a module on our POS system that will now have the pictures of the coin and the number of coins that the cashier. It is thousands of dollars a year in miscounts now. The public school education system has never been more expensive and not been nearly as effective as it once was. Basic math does not exist. It is crazy. So now, if it's 45 cents, it'll be a picture of a quarter and 2 dimes. So that the person can then match that and hand it to them. I kid you not. And it's not just us. If you go to some of the bigger American chains, or some of them even do them here, they now have machines that actually dole out the change for the cashier, because it was cheaper to run the machine and buy the machine than to trust the cashier to be able to put out 45 cents. It is absolutely crazy, and I kid you not, we are doing that.
So that goes to my original question. Has technology made things better or worse? Like, are we smarter or are we dumber? So,
well, I was just reading about this idea now. There's this ChatGPT brain now, where people are now so lazy, they don't even know how to research anything. Like Google is now too hard. So they just go to their AI module and then just ask it a question. It does everything for them. And it's a huge problem, because more often than not, it's wrong. That it'll go and it'll find some Reddit channel or Quora, which just a minefield of absolute garbage and stuff. So the new question that fooled Google's AI and has forced them to scrap a lot of their research is, can you melt an egg? So Ask Jeeves and Yahoo, older search engines, will just bring up pages that say, no, you can't melt an egg. Eggs are full of protein. Protein can't melt. Google's AI was telling people you could melt eggs because it actually had found AI slop on Quora. So Quora is populating its channel with all this AI slop and garbage to trick AIs to coming into Quora, thus increasing their traffic and the money they can sell to advertisers. So now AI has become broken in its search because people have figured out how to trick it and drive traffic to their website.
Wow. So they haven't figured out how to fact check.
No, it's literally, the whole thing is designed to trick itself and go. So according to Google AI, you can melt an egg. So this is a massive problem where we've already lost the ability to critical think a long time ago. And what's even worse now is we're just getting regurgitated AI slop thrown at us, and people are taking it for fact. Like, I always tell my kids that work for me and stuff, trust nothing on Wikipedia. Wikipedia is absolute junk. There's no need to even use Wikipedia, but it's easy. You have to do 30 other pages to try to get what Wikipedia will put in a paragraph. The problem is, more often than not, that paragraph is not real. It is not based in reality. And this is why we have people that think the world is flat. And there's a giant ice wall surrounding the whole place and all this kind of jazz, because there's a lot of pages out there that tell you that it is flat.
That is hilarious. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll come back with these quick messages from our sponsor, and we'll talk about Tipsy Tales. Located along Vancouver's False Creek shoreline, Legacy Liquor Store has been delivering an award-winning experience since 2010. With over 5,000 unique wines, spirits, craft beers, and ciders, there's always something new to discover. Our passionate, knowledgeable team is ready to help you find the perfect bottle for any occasion. Explore the full selection, exclusive releases at legacyliquorstore.com. Legacy Liquor Store, where exceptional choice meets personal service in-store and online. Yeah. My brother, he was going to join us, but he's a realtor, and we were going to dive into is it a dream home? So Is it still a dream to own your own home, or is it now too unattainable? Like, what is the buying power of the past generations from like the 40s and 50s compared to the buying power now? So,
I right now, one of my guys is talking about buying a place. I'm like, wait one more year. The crash is happening, but right now, the plane is just hitting, the midway point to the ground. You want to buy at the ground.
yeah.
There's 8,000 unsold condos in the GVRD now where people have walked on their deposit. The GTA is even worse. Did you see the condo sales in Toronto for the month of October?
No.
53 units.
What?
53 units sold in Toronto in October. The housing market has collapsed in Canada.
Now, why has it collapsed? Is it because
literally what is happening is all of these big units and all these big builds that started 3-4 years ago have come onto the market. And I didn't realize this. I've just started digging this, but I didn't realize, I've never bought a new build. But when you buy a new build, you pay a deposit, and you actually have a final price that is projected to be the price in the future.
So it's a floating or it's a moving target?
No, it's a locked-in target. So say you come in and they say, okay, we're building this new place, and it's $1,000 a square foot, and you're going to buy it at that. So you put your 10% deposit down, and when the building comes online, you pay $1,000 a square foot. But what happens when it's only worth $800,000 or $800 a square foot? Guess what's happening? The bank is like, no, we're not giving you a mortgage for that. So the banks are walking away from these because they know that this whole thing has fallen apart. The Ponzi scheme that is housing in Canada has collapsed because we started to overbuild and investors walked away. So the market is collapsing and it's bonkers right now. Laurentian Bank is 700% over leveraged. Great Western Bank just got a hostile takeover from National Bank. So the medium-sized banks are starting to collapse. That was happening in the U.S. in 2006 and 2007. You can see two different strategies. Royal Bank is over-leveraging itself. They think, okay, we can get in on these right now real cheap, and then when the market booms, we're going to make a fortune. TD, on the other hand, is going, we're not close to the bottom, and they're shedding debt. And then what's happening on top of that, power of sales have never been higher since the data set began in the 1980s. So there are more bank seizure houses for sale right now on the market than there have been ever. The delinquency rates and the split in the data sets are even crazier. The delinquency set on mortgages, on one side, you have the banks that just record income that just had record revenue. They're saying delinquency rates are only 0.24%. But independent statistics say that the delinquency rate in Canada is actually over 2.5%. And it's how you declare delinquency rates. So the banks don't say you're delinquent until you haven't made 3 mortgage payments in a row. Okay. They're using statistics of if you miss 1 mortgage payment, it's a delinquent mortgage. So what's happening is it's getting worse. So the bank's using a 12-month rolling 12 and going, oh, it's only 2.5%. But if you use last month, it's 2%. So we've seen 100% increase in delinquencies in 30 days.
Oh, wow.
And it's bonkers. And it's like there's barely any talk about it on mainstream media simply because there's a general thought of talk of panic creates a panic.
Yeah.
And then also, so we're still in that rah-rah Canada phase with the main media, but then also the advertising dollars that the real estate industry and the reverse home mortgage industry puts into the media is really the cash cow that's keeping them going. So if you start saying the housing market's crashing, Bob Rennie pulls his advertising dollars, it's a double whammy. It's pretty crazy what's going on right now.
That is insane.
Yeah, so if you're in the market for a house, wait 365 days. Literally, they just opened up a building right here next to Legacy, and it had sold out signs when it was being built. They just put a huge sign up that said 20 units, finished units for sale. It means 20 people in that building walked on their deposit because that's what's happening. You show up and it's like, I'm not paying what it's not worth, and I can't get a mortgage anyway. Keep my deposit.
Well, then you have like if you do go through with it, how much negative equity?
Well, and you have to use your own income to do it because the bank will not give you a mortgage at a value that is more than the property is valued at. And so they're walking on the deposit. So imagine that building now. They've got 20 units. The other units have to eat the strata cost of 20 units a month to maintain the building. So what are the strata fees doing over there? And this cycle is continuing. We're going to see what happens with Oak Ridge, because when Oak Ridge comes online and people are like, nope, yeah, here's my deposit. And the deposit's spent. The deposit was used to build the building.
Yeah.
Right? So it's going to be crazy.
Well, and then you put in that vicious cycle of, okay, we've got so many construction sites that are swallowing up all the construction materials like rebar and concrete, two of your biggest expenses, that now all of a sudden, from when you started, it was one price to when you finish, it's now doubled the price. I know one contract, I used to do waterproofing, and for when they first spec'd out and started digging the holes, concrete was $1,000 a yard, and by the time they actually got to pouring and almost finishing the thing, it gone up to $2,000 a yard.
Yeah, you're looking at a 100% increase in construction costs. And when the building is a concrete building, that is, and this is going to keep going this way because we're actually in a negative population growth now in Canada. So for the first time in 40 years, more people left the country than came in. So we're losing all of our, there's two groups of people that are leaving. The professionals, so we're getting a brain drain. So they're looking at the U.S. with lower taxes, more opportunity. They're all moving down there. I lost one of my best soccer players. Her dad was an oncologist at Royal Columbian. He finally took a job in Everett, Washington. He makes more in a month than he did in a year. Legally, he's only allowed to work 40 hours a week. He was doing 70.
Oh, wow.
And he's making U.S. dollars. And so he moved down to Washington State. So we lost an oncologist, and I lost one of my best defenders.
Oh. Sad.
Yeah.
At Abbotsford Sun Hangdale, every class has a step towards confidence, focus, and fitness. Kids gain respect and self-discipline. Adults build strength and resilience, all in a welcoming community. Start your journey today at sunhangdo.com/Abbotsford-Marshall-Arts and try a free class.
All right, welcome back to XYZ, the generational talk show where we figure out whose generation comes on top. I'm your host, Nathan Kliem. We've got Kian Gilroy, and we've got our guest, Darryl Lamb, joining us for Legacy Liquor. So, and Darryl, welcome to the section we're calling Tipsy Tales. What kind of tales can you drum up for us that we might be interested in?
You mean like in the liquor business?
In the liquor business, what kind of like
business we've ever had?
You know, the seedy underbelly that we have, or the just some of the the sketchy things that go on in say like
there's some interesting stuff because we talk about a business that is worth billions of dollars that also heavily advertises and works with like big chains everywhere. So there's opportunity. You might have seen recently over in Ontario where a key player at Molson Coors is now being sued for misappropriating $9 million in advertising spending with a pub group over there called the Furkin Group. It was all over the media a little bit there. So essentially I was surprised at how much Molson Coors just put out. They literally laid it all out in the public. They went to the Globe and Mail. Here's what happened. So the Molson sales manager and the owner of the Furkin Group hatched this plan to misappropriate funds legally and illegally. So the story goes that their spouses, their wives, started support companies, and then they passed fake invoices through their wives' shell companies kind of thing. And so $9 million just vanished, and they Molson Coors wants their money back. The Furkin Group is a kind of a British pub group. You'd buy a franchise, you'd get the Furkin name. So there was like the Fox and the Furkin, the Bear and the Furkin. That guys, you'd open up a plastic patty kind of British pub sort of deal. And I guess what was happening was they were, you're allowed to do certain things. Like you can give them coasters, you're allowed to give them tap handles, things like that. Well, I guess, Buddy's wife started the printing company that was going to print the coasters, but the coasters never got printed and things like that. So there's a little bit of that. I mean, when you go back to the dark old ages in the 50s in BC, and some of the stories I've heard is you'd have the big beer companies paying for, dental work, and they would be giving out loans and things. So our business in BC is heavily regulated. Trade practices is there. It's actually more controlled than pharmacological items. I think it's absolutely bonkers that pharma corporations can bring doctors down to like conferences in Rio de Janeiro and things like that to teach them all about these new prescriptions in them to not dish out unless, of course, the patient actually needs them. But that's not allowed in our business. Like, we're not allowed, like, they're not allowed to just, wine and dine us and do all this stuff there. So it's like, there's more control on a liquor store than there is on the Slacker Brothers, which I think is just bonkers.
Who had to ruin that in the past? Because that sounds like so much fun.
Yeah. I think it was back in the 50s when they were sort of, still just emerging from Prohibition. We had Prohibition in Canada, and so like my great grandmother was actually a temperance officer for the LCBO. So her job was to nose out the illegal saloons and then dime them to the cops. They literally put those people in charge of liquor distribution in Ontario. So no different than when we legalized marijuana and all those police chiefs who had spent 30 years arresting people for joints suddenly were on all the boards of the marijuana corporations. So I think it was Bill Blair, the former chief of police in Toronto, is now one of the biggest players in marijuana. I was like, how many people did you put in? How many lives did you ruin? And now you're a multimillionaire over this kind of stuff. But I think in the 50s they were still a little touchy about it. So people were getting loans. There was some dicey stuff back in the day, but it's heavily controlled now. The fines are massive. Alberta just laid out a fine on a company for over $300,000 for paying a DJ bill. So there was a festival and they paid the DJ bill and the fine was $300,000.
Wow.
So they don't mess around when it comes to that. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in Ontario with this missing $9 million there. I'll give you an example of like the crazy rules. So if you're a brewery, you're a craft brewery, and you want to have your beer at a bar, you're allowed to give them the tap handle.
Right.
You can give them the coaster, but you can't do branded glassware. Branded glassware is illegal in BC.
Oh, wow.
Because the glass is a requirement of the business. So if the business requires something to be in business, you're not allowed to give it to them. So you can't have a bar without glasses. So all that branded glassware that you see around the province and you go in and it's, it's got the Rickards Red logo or whatever, that's not allowed. And we're in this weird spot now where these rules have not been enforced for generations. And now, as the provincial government in British Columbia starts to run out of money and the deficit hits, record levels, suddenly they're dusting off all the old regulations to try to get... it was one of the most dangerous things, I think, when we talk about was when David Eby was in opposition and his portfolio was actually to watch the liquor business because it was under the Attorney General, so he was the shadow cabinet Attorney General. He would use terms like fine revenue. And fines aren't revenue. Fines are meant for the public good. Fines are meant for public safety. If you start looking at fines as revenue, that's when you're going to start getting speed cameras and you're going to start getting photo radar and they're back-end tax. And so now... we just doled out $21 billion on a 4-year contract to the Government Employees Union. They got to come up with that money somehow. So now they're telling people you can't give out branded glassware. Like the local Legion's not allowed to get free glasses from Labatt. They've got to buy their glasses. It's going to be crazy. I mean, I don't think Vancouver ever repealed the no sneezing in the streets bylaws because you would scare the horses if you did. Right. And so, you might have to pay that $2 fine if you sneeze in the streets. It could get bad.
Are you the swear police or are you the spit police?
Yeah, right? Like it's going to be bonkers.
I have a story about that in Whistler, running across the police. We're like, "Are you the swear police or the spit police?" And they went, "Oh, we're the spit, or we're the swear police." And good, patooey. I had that stuck in my throat all day.
Nice.
That was the '90s. That was back in the '90s. Whistler.
Yeah. I mean,
down
there's some weird stuff now. Like it's going to be interesting to see what happens when FIFA comes because. My understanding is FIFA does not want to allow drinking in parks in Vancouver because they only want the public drinking to be in the FIFA zones.
Right. Like,
so they've already done some interesting stuff. Like there's no Folk Fest this year. There's no Children's Fest this year because all festivals have to be canceled during the World Cup. So a bunch of festivals have been canceled. And now we're understanding that public consumption, because I was trying to get the public square. So the gate to get to the games is right here in the Olympic Village. So I wanted the public square in the Olympic Village to be open consumption. I want all those Scots and Dutchmen and all the crazy people drinking as much retail beer as they can out in the parking lot. And I got told by someone at City Hall that actually we might not be allowed to have any public consumption. Even the parks that are 365, like Adanac Park is a full year open consumption park in Vancouver.
Right.
They want those shut down. That's going to be a little interesting. So we'll see if the police are out there handing out FIFA fines to for people not drinking legal FIFA beer at the FIFA entertainment zones.
Very draconian.
Yeah. I mean, like how much is enough? So to shut down the Folk Festival and Children's Fest, is that because they don't want to lose the talent. They don't want to lose the porta-johns. They don't want to lose the fencing, right? Mm-hmm. So I want to. There's things like Bard on the Beach. Does Bard on the Beach not allowed to be functional during the World Cup because the World Cup needs the resources? And the same thing happened during the Olympics. During the Olympics, nothing else could happen but the Olympics.
Oh yeah, and businesses that were well established for 20 years who had maybe Olympia in their name were not allowed to use that.
Well, there's talk about that Boston Pizza next to the BC Place. It's inside the controlled zones that you're not allowed to enter if you don't have a ticket. So how does that Boston Pizza make money? Are they allowed to sell pizza to the people outside there? I don't know. It's going to be really crazy to see what happens with all these things that are gobbled up. We're right at the catbird seat. I kid you not. The gate to get to the stadium is 200 yards from Legacy. I'm like, oh, this is going to be spectacular, but not if there's 30 police officers outside making sure that the English aren't allowed to drink beer. Like, that's going to cause nothing but trouble in the city. It's going to be crazy.
Good luck. Good luck.
So we'll see how all this shakes out. It's going to be fun. FIFA's going to be, I mean, I'm excited about the World Cup, don't get me wrong. But when you start hearing about stuff like you're not allowed to have a beer in Dude Chilling Park during the World Cup, that seems a little over the top.
Oh, that is an iconic picture and an iconic advertising, or just a memory for people to have a beer in Dude Chilling Park.
Well, the seawall's right here. The seawall's the best patio on planet Earth.
Yeah.
Right? The entire seawall you should be allowed to have a beer on the seawall.
Little things.
One day we'll get to the 1940s.
All right. All right, Darryl. Well, let everyone know how they can get a hold of you and where they can check out your podcast.
You can check us out on sportsnet.ca, AM 650. You can on all your favorite Spotify podcast sites, Apple Music, things like that. Or you can always come down to Legacy Liquor Store and we can chat about whatever you want because I'm always here. So follow us at Legacy Liquor, and thanks for having me on. This was fun.
Hey, excellent. Thanks very much. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Kian.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks for coming. Take care, guys.